Commander Lucas stood at the airlock of the Virillian vessel, his worn leather armor creaking as he shifted his weight. The dark-haired human adjusted the sword strapped to his back and the knife at his belt, feeling out of place among the sleek corridors that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly luminescence. His brown eyes scanned the environment with the instinct of a soldier who had seen too many battlefields. This was supposed to be simple. Stand there, look intimidating, and let the diplomats handle the talking. The mission was a formality to establish trade relations between Earth and the Virillian Consortium. Lucas was just there as security, a reminder that humanity, though primitive by galactic standards, was not defenseless. A liaison officer with pale blue skin and the silver markings approached him, her movements graceful and fluid. She gestured for him to follow, leading him through corridors lined with translucent panels that showed the vast expanse of space beyond. Stars stretched into infinity, and Lucas felt the familiar weight of isolation that came with being light years from home. The officer said nothing, but her violet eyes kept drifting to the sword on his back, as if she found the weapon both primitive and fascinating. They reached the Grand Hall, a massive chamber with a domed ceiling that displayed a real-time panorama of the surrounding star system. Lucas had seen luxury before, but this was something else entirely. The floor seemed to be made of polished stone that reflected light like water, and the walls were adorned with tapestries woven from materials that shimmered with their own inner glow. At the far end of the hall, seated on a raised platform, was High Counselor Mariani. Lucas had been briefed about her, but nothing prepared him for seeing her in person. She was stunning in a way that transcended species. Her white hair cascaded down to her waist in waves that caught the light, and her skin had that soft blue hue that seemed to glow from within. But it was her eyes that held him, amethyst pools that regarded him with intelligence and curiosity. She wore flowing robes that somehow managed to be both elegant and practical, and there was an air of authority about her that made it clear she was used to command. Beside her, partially hidden behind the folds of her robes, were two small figures. Lucas spotted them immediately. Twin girls no more than 8 years old by human standards, with the same blue skin and delicate features as their mother. They peeked at him with wide eyes, curiosity battling with shyness. The one on the left had a small birthmark near her eye, the only visible difference between them. Lucas approached and gave a respectful nod. Mariani rose gracefully, her height matching his own, which surprised him. Most Virillians he had seen were taller and more slender. She extended her hand in the human custom, and when he took it, her skin felt cool and smooth, like polished jade. "Commander Lucas," she said, her voice like music, speaking perfect English with only the slightest accent. "Welcome aboard the Celestial Harmony. I am Mariani of House Velestron, and these are my daughters, Nelias and Fabelli." Lucas crouched down to be at eye level with the girls. Up close, he could see they were indeed identical, except for that small mark on Nelias's face. "It's an honor to meet you both," he said gently. The girls giggled, and Fabelli whispered something to her sister in their native tongue. Mariani smiled, and Lucas saw genuine warmth there, not just diplomatic courtesy. The negotiations began with the usual formalities. Lucas stood to the side, his role exactly what he had expected, silent and imposing. The human diplomatic team discussed trade routes, resource exchanges, and cultural programs, while Mariani and her advisors responded with measured consideration. It was all going smoothly, almost boringly so, when the alarm shattered the peace. The sound was deafening, a pulsing wail that immediately set Lucas's combat instincts on fire. The ship lurched violently, throwing people off their feet. Lucas grabbed a nearby pillar to steady himself as the lights flickered and died, replaced by harsh red emergency lighting that painted everything in shades of blood. Through the transparent walls, he saw explosions blooming in the void like deadly flowers. "Attack!" someone screamed. Virillian guards rushed into the hall, their weapons drawn, forming a protective circle around Mariani and the twins. But Lucas could see the panic in their eyes. Whatever was happening, they weren't prepared for it. The liaison officer who had guided him earlier rushed up to Mariani, her face pale even against her blue skin. "Roni Raiders, High Counselor. 3 ships, heavily armed. They've breached the hull in 7 sectors." Roni Raiders. Lucas had heard of them. Pirate scum who preyed on isolated vessels, known for their brutality and their tendency to leave no survivors. The ship shuddered again, and this time Lucas heard the sound of tearing metal, a scream of a structural failure that echoed through the corridors. Then they came. The far wall of the grand hall exploded inward, and through the smoke and debris poured nightmares made flesh. The Roni looked like a fusion of insect and reptile, standing upright on powerful legs, their bodies covered in chitinous plates that gleamed in the emergency lights. They had 4 arms, each ending in claws that could tear through metal, and their heads were dominated by mandibles that clicked and chittered with hunger. Their eyes, multifaceted and cold, swept the room seeking prey. The Varillian guards opened fire, but their weapons seemed to do little against the armored hides of the invaders. Lucas saw 3 guards go down in seconds, torn apart by those terrible claws. Mariani grabbed her daughters and tried to run, but the chaos was absolute. People were screaming, running in all directions, and the raiders were everywhere. An explosion rocked the platform where Mariani had been standing, and the force of it threw her backward. Lucas saw it happen in slow motion. The twins, separated from their mother, stumbling toward a group of raiders that were cutting through the remaining guards like wheat before a scythe. Lucas didn't think. He just moved. His sword came off his back in one fluid motion, the blade singing as it cleared the sheath. He crossed the distance in seconds, his legs pumping with the strength that came from a lifetime of training and a childhood spent on a world with higher gravity than this ship's artificial pull. The first raider didn't even see him coming. Lucas's sword took its head clean off, the blade biting through chitin and flesh with a sound like breaking pottery. The other raiders turned, but Lucas was already there. He grabbed both girls, one in each arm, and ran. Nellis and Fabelli clung to him, their small hands gripping his armor, their faces buried against his chest. Behind him, he heard the enraged screech of the raiders giving chase. The corridor ahead was blocked by fallen debris, flames licking at the edges. Lucas turned, saw a side passage, and dove into it. The raiders were fast, their claws scrabbling on the metal floor, but Lucas knew how to use terrain. He took sharp turns, doubled back, led them through narrow spaces where their bulk worked against them. "Where are the escape pods?" he barked at Nellis, whose face was pressed against his shoulder. The girl was trembling, but she lifted her head and Lucas saw courage in those young eyes. "7th deck," she whispered, her voice shaking but clear. "Bay 17. Lucas adjusted his grip on the girls and kept running. The ship was tearing itself apart around them. He passed bodies, both Varillian and human, and tried not to think about the fact that his diplomatic team was probably among the dead. Right now, all that mattered were the 2 lives he held in his arms. They reached a maintenance shaft, a vertical tunnel with a ladder leading down. Lucas could hear the raiders behind them, their chittering growing louder. He looked at the girls. "Can you climb?" Nellis nodded. Fabelli looked terrified but followed her sister's lead. Lucas helped them onto the ladder and started climbing down, positioning himself below them to catch them if they fell. The shaft was cramped and dark, lit only by sporadic emergency lights. Lucas's sword banged against the rungs, but he didn't dare leave it behind. They were halfway down when the raiders found the shaft. Lucas looked up and saw 3 of them peering down, their mandibles clicking with anticipation. One started to climb down after them. Lucas made a quick decision. He grabbed the girls and jumped. They fell 10 feet and landed hard. Lucas took the impact on his side, rolling to protect the twins. Pain flared through his ribs, but he pushed it aside. The raider was climbing down fast and the others would follow. Lucas spotted a heavy access panel hanging loose from the wall. He grabbed it, muscles straining, and as the raider dropped past, he swung it with all his strength. The panel caught the creature in midair and smashed it into the wall. The raider's chitin cracked with a sound like breaking glass, and it fell limp to the floor. Lucas didn't wait to see if it was dead. He grabbed the girls again and ran down the corridor, following the signs to deck 7. The 7th deck was a scene from hell. Bodies lay everywhere, and the walls were scorched with burn marks. Lucas saw a Varillian guard still moving, trying to crawl toward an escape pod. The man's legs were gone, and he left a trail of blue blood. Lucas wanted to help, but he had 2 lives depending on him. He kept moving. Bay 17 was just ahead, but 5 raiders stood between them and salvation. Lucas set the girls down gently and pushed them behind a fallen support beam. He drew his sword and a long knife from his belt. No more running. Time to fight. The raiders saw him and charged. Lucas met them head-on. The first one lunged, all 4 claws reaching for him. Lucas ducked under the attack and drove his sword up through the creature's softer underbelly. Blue-green blood sprayed across his face. burning like acid. He ignored the pain and twisted the blade, using the dying raider's body as a shield against the second attacker. The second raider's claws punched through its comrade's corpse and barely missed Lucas's head. He shoved the body forward, knocking the raider off balance and followed up with a slash across its throat. The creature made a gurgling sound and collapsed. 3 left. They were more cautious now, circling him, looking for an opening. Lucas kept his back to the support beam where the girls hid, his weapons ready. His ribs screamed with every breath, and he could feel blood running down his side from where the first raider's claws had caught him, but he stood firm. The raiders attacked together, a coordinated assault meant to overwhelm him. Lucas sidestepped the first, used his knife to deflect the claws of the second, and brought his sword down on the skull of the third. The blade stuck in bone, and he had to wrench it free, leaving himself open. The second raider's claws raked across his back, shredding leather and flesh. Lucas roared in pain and rage, spinning, and drove his knife into the creature's eye. It shrieked and stumbled back, ichor pouring from the wound. The last raider, seeing its companions fall, hesitated. That moment of doubt was all Lucas needed. He feinted left, and when the creature moved to block, he went right, his sword a silver blur in the emergency lighting. The blade caught the raider across its multiple joints, and the creature went down, its limbs twitching in death throes. Lucas stood there, chest heaving, covered in blood, both alien and his own. He heard a whimper and turned to see Nelius and Fabelli staring at him with wide eyes. He must have looked like a monster himself. He wiped the blood from his face and managed a smile. "Come on, let's get you home." The escape pod bay was chaos, but Lucas found one intact capsule. He helped the girls inside, strapping them into the seats designed for adult Virillians. The controls were in their language, but Nellis, bless her brave heart, reached over and activated the launch sequence. Her small fingers moved with certainty over the interface. "My mother taught us," she said softly, seeing Lucas's questioning look. "In case of emergency." Smart woman, Lucas thought. He climbed in and sealed the hatch just as another explosion rocked the ship. Through the small viewport, he saw the celestial harmony breaking apart, pieces of it spinning off into the void. He wondered if Mariani had made it to safety, if any of his team had survived. The pod launched with a violent jolt that slammed Lucas against the bulkhead. The girls screamed, but the pod's systems held. They shot away from the dying ship, and Lucas got one last look at it as it exploded, a brief sun in the darkness of space. Then they were tumbling, the pod's damaged thrusters firing erratically, dragging them toward the nearest planet. Lucas tried to access the controls, but everything was in Virillion, and the damage to the systems made them unresponsive. They were going down, whether they liked it or not. Through the viewport, he saw a green and blue world growing larger, its surface obscured by thick clouds. "Hold on!" he shouted, pulling the girls close and bracing himself. The pod hit the atmosphere hard, and the world became fire and screaming metal. The heat was intense, and Lucas felt his skin burning where it pressed against the superheated hull. Then they were through the worst of it, plummeting through dense cloud cover. The surface rushed up to meet them, thick jungle, endless green, and no sign of civilization. The pod's emergency systems kicked in at the last second, firing retro thrusters that barely slowed their descent. They hit the canopy, branches smashing through the viewport, showering them with leaves and debris. Then they struck the ground, and the world went black. Lucas woke to pain. Every part of his body hurt, but especially his ribs. Broken, definitely. He tried to move and gasped at the sharp agony that lanced through his chest. The pod was on its side, partially buried in soft earth. Sunlight filtered through the broken viewport, and he could hear sounds outside. Animal calls, the rustle of wind through leaves, running water nearby. "Commander?" a small voice said. Lucas turned his head and saw Nellis and Fabelli huddled together, scared but alive. They had a few scratches and bruises, but nothing serious. The pod's safety systems had done their job. "I'm okay," Lucas lied, forcing himself to sit up. The movement sent fresh waves of agony through his ribs, but he bit down on it. The girls needed to see him strong. "Let's see where we are." He managed to get the hatch open, and they climbed out into an alien jungle. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the scent of vegetation and something else, something musky and predatory. The trees were massive, their trunks as wide as houses, and their leaves formed a canopy so dense that the ground below was cast in perpetual twilight. Blue moss grew on everything, and Lucas realized with a start that some of the local animals had blue fur, just visible as they scurried through the undergrowth. The pod had crashed in a small clearing near a stream. Lucas could see fish-like creatures in the water, their scales shimmering with iridescent colors. Everything here was alive, pulsing with vitality, and he knew instinctively that they were in danger. This was an untamed world, and they were intruders. He went back to the pod and salvaged what he could: a medical kit, some ration packs, 2 canteens that he filled with stream water after using a purification tab, and a tarp. His sword and knife were still with him, and he found a small hatchet in the emergency supplies. Primitive weapons, but they had kept him alive this far. The peace didn't last long. Lucas heard something moving in the jungle, something big. Branches snapped, and the ground trembled with heavy footfalls. He grabbed the girls and pushed them behind a fallen log, then turned to face whatever was coming. 3 creatures emerged from the jungle, and Lucas's heart sank. They were reptilian, each the size of a horse, with thick blue-gray scales and jaws filled with teeth like daggers. They moved on 4 powerful legs, but they could rear up on their hind legs to strike. Their eyes, yellow and slitted, fixed on the pod and the scent of fresh meat. Lucas drew his sword and positioned himself between the predators and the children. The creatures circled, their heads low, tails swishing. They were pack hunters, intelligent enough to coordinate their attack. Lucas knew he had to strike first, had to kill one quickly to make the others think twice. The nearest predator lunged, jaws gaping. Lucas sidestepped and brought his sword down on the creature's neck. The blade bit deep, severing scales and muscle, and the predator crashed to the ground, its blood staining the blue moss black. The other 2 hesitated, and Lucas roared at them, a primal sound that came from the deepest part of his being. He was human, and humans had not clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain by being prey. The predators backed off, their eyes wary. They grabbed their dead companion and dragged it back into the jungle, disappearing into the shadows. Lucas stood there, sword dripping, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His ribs were on fire, and he could taste blood in his mouth. He heard sobbing and turned to see Fabelli crying, her small face buried in her sister's shoulder. Nellis held her, but her eyes were on Lucas, and there was something like awe in them. "We need shelter," Lucas said, keeping his voice steady. "Somewhere defensible before night falls." They moved away from the pod, following the stream. Lucas knew water attracted life, both predator and prey, but it also meant they wouldn't die of thirst. He kept the girls close, his sword never returning to its sheath. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every sound a potential attack. They had walked for maybe an hour when Nellis tugged on his sleeve. "There," she said, pointing. Lucas followed her gaze and saw rocky outcroppings rising from the jungle floor. He approached cautiously and found what he was looking for: a cave entrance, narrow and low, perfect for defense. The opening was too small for large predators, but big enough for them to squeeze through. "Inside, both of you," Lucas ordered. The girls crawled into the cave without argument. Lucas followed, having to turn sideways to fit his shoulders through the gap. The cave widened beyond the entrance, forming a natural chamber about 15 feet across. The floor was dry, and there were no signs of animal habitation. Perfect. Lucas went back to the entrance and started gathering stones, piling them to further narrow the opening. The sun was setting, and he knew what was coming. Predators always got bolder at night. He could feel it in his bones, a soldier's instinct honed by countless battles. As darkness fell over the jungle, the sounds changed. The chirping of what he assumed were insects grew louder, and deeper calls echoed through the trees. Then he heard it, the roar of a predator, close by, answered by others in the distance. The smell of blood from the pod had drawn them. Lucas settled himself at the cave entrance, sword in one hand, knife in the other. Behind him, Nellis and Fabelli huddled together, wrapped in the tarp he had salvaged. They didn't speak, but he could feel their fear, could hear their rapid breathing. He wanted to comfort them, but he needed to stay focused. Their lives depended on it. The first predator came with full dark. It was like the one he had killed earlier, but larger, its eyes glowing in the shadows. It approached the cave cautiously, sniffing at the entrance. Lucas waited until it was close, then struck, his blade catching it across the snout. The creature reeled back, roaring in pain, and disappeared into the night. But others came. one after another, drawn by blood and the scent of prey. Lucas fought them at the narrow entrance, using the confined space to his advantage. A predator could only come at him one at a time, and while they were strong and fast, they weren't as smart as him. He learned their patterns, the way they feinted and struck, the slight shift of their weight before they lunged. He killed them methodically, each death adding to the growing pile of bodies that clogged the entrance. His arms ached, his hands were slick with blood, and his broken ribs sent lightning bolts of agony through his chest with every movement. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop. Behind him were two little girls who trusted him to keep them safe, and he would die before he let anything through that entrance. The night stretched on forever. Lucas lost count of how many he killed. 20, 30, more. They kept coming, drawn by the death smell and the challenge of prey that refused to fall. His sword arm grew heavy, his movements slower. Blood ran down his arms, some of it his own from a dozen wounds where claws had found their mark through gaps in his armor. Between waves of attacks, Lucas spoke to the girls. He told them about Earth's oceans, vast bodies of water that stretch beyond the horizon. He described mountains that pierce the clouds, forests of trees so tall they seemed to touch the sky. He told them about snow, about how water could freeze into white crystals that fell from the sky and blanketed the world in silence. "Is it beautiful?" Nellis asked, her voice barely audible. "It's the most beautiful thing you've never seen," Lucas replied, then grunted as another predator tested the entrance. He drove it back with a vicious slash that took off one of its forelegs. The creature retreated, screaming, and Lucas continued his story. "When I was young, my father took me camping in the mountains. We'd sit by a fire and watch the stars, and he'd tell me stories about the constellations." "What's camping?" Fabelli asked. "It's when you sleep outside, under the stars, for fun," Lucas explained, blocking another strike. His ribs screamed, but he pushed through the pain. "You bring food and tents and spend days just exploring nature." "That sounds scary," Fabelli whispered. Lucas laughed, though it hurt. "It can be, but scary and beautiful often go together. Like this jungle, it's trying to kill us, but look at those blue plants, those glowing insects. This world is magnificent, even as it tests us." The predators came again, 3 at once this time, coordinating their attack. Lucas shifted his weight, favoring his stronger leg, and met them with calculated violence. He had learned their rhythms now, knew the exact moment before they struck, the slight tensing of muscles that telegraphed their intentions. He used their aggression against them, letting them overcommit, then punishing their mistakes. Hours passed. Lucas's voice grew hoarse from talking, but he kept it up. He recited poems he remembered from childhood, sang songs that his grandmother had taught him, told jokes that made the girls giggle despite their terror. He needed them to know he was still there, still functioning, still protecting them. As long as they could hear his voice, they would have hope. Around the 4th hour, Lucas started to feel his body failing. The blood loss was getting serious. His movements were becoming sluggish, his reactions slower. A claw that should have missed caught his left arm, tearing through muscle. He nearly dropped his sword, had to switch hands, fighting awkwardly with his offhand, while his dominant arm hung useless. "Commander!" Nellis's voice small and frightened. "Still here," Lucas gritted out, driving his blade into a predator's eye. The creature thrashed and died. "Not going anywhere." "You're hurt," she said, and he could hear her moving closer. "Stay back," Lucas commanded. "I'm fine. Just a scratch." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. He was dying by inches, each wound another step toward the darkness. His vision was narrowing, his peripheral awareness fading. The entrance of the cave had become his entire world, a circle of violence lit by alien moons and the bioluminescent plants that grew on the rocks. Another predator came, and Lucas met it, but his sword moved a fraction too slow. The creature's jaws clamped on his shoulder, teeth grinding against the leather and the flesh beneath. Pain exploded through him, white-hot and all-consuming. He roared and drove his knife up through the creature's soft palate and into its brain. It released him and fell, twitching. Lucas stumbled back, pressing his hand against the wound. Blood poured between his fingers, warm and slick. He was going to die here. He knew it with certainty. There was too much damage, too much blood loss. But he couldn't die yet, not while the girls still needed him. He propped himself against the cave wall, sword in his good hand, and waited for the next attack. It came, and he killed it, though the effort nearly took him to his knees. Then another, and another. Time lost all meaning. There was only the endless parade of predators and the increasingly desperate struggle to keep them out. There was a moment, perhaps 2 hours before dawn, when Lucas thought he might actually fail. A particularly large predator, scarred and battle-savvy, managed to get its head and one foreleg through the entrance. Its jaws snapped inches from Lucas's face, and he could smell its rancid breath. For a moment they were locked there, the predator trying to force its way in, Lucas bracing against it with his sword lodged in its chest. His strength was failing. The predator was pushing him back inch by inch. Behind him, he heard Fabelli scream. This was it. This was how it ended. He had fought as long as he could, killed as many as possible, but it wasn't enough. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end, for the teeth that would tear out his throat. Then Nelis was there, the little girl holding the hatchet he had salvaged. She brought it down on the predator's exposed leg with all her strength. The creature howled and tried to pull back, and Lucas used that moment to draw on reserves he didn't know he had. He pushed, driving his sword deeper, angling up under the ribs to find the heart. The predator shuddered and died, and Lucas and Nelis dragged its body to block more of the entrance. "Good girl," Lucas panted, and Nelis gave him a tiny, terrified smile before running back to her sister. But the moment of truth had shown Lucas something. He couldn't do this alone. He was human, yes. He was strong and trained and desperate. But he was also mortal, and he was reaching his limits. He needed the girls to help, even if it meant putting them at risk. "Nelius," he called, his voice weak. "I need you to watch. Tell me when they're coming. Be my eyes." The girl understood immediately. She positioned herself where she could see past him to the entrance, and she began to call out warnings. "Left side! 2 of them! Behind you!" Her voice was steady, controlled, and Lucas used her directions to compensate for his failing vision and reflexes. Together they held the entrance. Lucas fighting, Nelis guiding, and Fabelli singing softly to herself, a lullaby in Varillian that somehow gave them all courage. It was the strangest war council ever assembled, a dying human warrior, a 9-year-old girl with the heart of a general, and her sister providing the soundtrack to their desperate last stand. The attack slowed as dawn approached. The predators were getting wary, the pile of their dead too high to ignore. Lucas had created a barrier of corpses at the entrance, a gruesome fortification that spoke of determination and sacrifice. When the first rays of sunlight penetrated the jungle canopy, Lucas allowed himself to relax slightly. He counted the bodies visible from the cave entrance. 87, plus the 13 or so that had fled wounded or given up. Roughly 100 in total. 100 monsters, all dead or driven off, by one man with a sword and a will of iron, and 2 girls who had refused to give up. Lucas stumbled away from the entrance and collapsed against the cave wall. His vision swam, and he realized he was going into shock. Blood loss, probably. He looked down at himself and saw that his armor was shredded, the leather torn in dozens of places. His arms and chest were crisscrossed with wounds, some shallow, some deep. His right hand had been torn open to the bone by a claw. He heard movement and saw Nelis and Fabelli approaching. They looked at him with wide eyes, and Fabelli started crying again. Nelis was more composed. She grabbed the medical kit Lucas had salvaged and opened it with steady hands. "My mother taught us," she said again, her voice stronger now, "how to treat wounds." The girls worked with surprising efficiency. They cleaned his wounds with antiseptic that burned like fire, then applied a healing gel that came in small tubes. The gel was cool and soothing, and Lucas felt the pain recede slightly. They wrapped bandages around his worst injuries and made him drink water from one of the canteens. "Is our mother alive?" Fabelli asked suddenly, her voice small and scared. Lucas looked at the twins, these brave little girls who had survived a nightmare. He thought about lying, about giving them false hope, but they deserved the truth. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but your mother is smart and strong. If anyone could survive that attack, it's her, and she will come looking for you. I promise you that." Nelis nodded, accepting this. "You saved us," she said simply. "You killed all those monsters to protect us." "That's my job," Lucas said. But even as he said it, He knew it was more than that. Somewhere during that long night, these girls had become more than a mission. They were his responsibility, his to protect, and he would die before he let any harm come to them. They rested through the morning, Lucas drifting in and out of consciousness. The pain in his ribs was constant, making every breath an effort, but the healing gel was doing its work. His wounds stopped bleeding, and the inflammation began to recede. Whatever technology the Virillians had in their medicine, it was light years ahead of Earth's. It was late morning when Lucas heard the sound of engines. At first he thought he was dreaming, but Nellie's heard it too. She scrambled to the cave entrance and peered out, then turned back with joy written across her face. "Ships! It's our people!" Lucas forced himself to stand and limp to the entrance. Through the gap he saw them, 3 sleek shuttles descending through the canopy, their hulls gleaming silver in the dappled sunlight. They landed in the clearing near the crash pod, and figures emerged. Leading them was Mariani. She wore practical armor now, fitted to her form, and carried what looked like a spear. Her white hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and even from a distance Lucas could see the relief and desperation on her face as she scanned the area. "Mother!" Nellie screamed, and both girls rushed out of the cave. Mariani turned at the sound, and Lucas saw her face transform. She ran toward them, dropping her spear, and swept both girls into her arms, falling to her knees and holding them tight. Her whole body shook with sobs, and Lucas heard her speaking rapidly in Virillian, words of love and relief and joy. He stayed at the cave entrance, giving them their moment. His legs felt weak, and he wasn't sure he could make the walk to the clearing anyway. But Mariani looked up and saw him. Her eyes widened as she took in his condition, blood-soaked, wounded, leaning against the rock for support. Then her gaze traveled beyond him to the cave entrance and the pile of bodies. She gently released the girls and stood, walking toward him with measured steps. A man in military armor followed her, his blue face marked with scars. He stopped at the pile of bodies and stared, then started counting. Lucas saw his lips moving, saw the disbelief growing on his face. Mariani reached Lucas and stopped, her eyes searching his face. Up close, he could see she had been crying, that her own armor was scorched and dented. She had fought her way here. "Commander Lucas," she said softly, and then her hand reached out to touch his face, her blue fingers gentle against his cheek. "My daughters told me what you did." "I did what anyone would do," Lucas said, but his voice was weak. The scarred soldier approached and saluted Mariani. "High Counselor," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "He killed them all. I count 92 bodies here, and signs of more in the jungle. 1 man against 100. Mariani's eyes never left Lucas's face. "Captain Pearson," she said, "ensure we have a full count. I want to know exactly how many lives this man took to save my children." Pearson nodded and moved off, calling orders to the other soldiers. Mariani stepped closer, and Lucas could smell her scent, something like flowers mixed with ozone. "In my culture," she said quietly, "there is a sacred bond formed when someone saves a child's life at such cost. To kill 100 enemies in defense of another's offspring is the highest act of valor. My house does not forget debts, especially those paid in blood." Lucas tried to respond, but the world chose that moment to spin. His legs gave out, and he would have fallen if Mariani hadn't caught him. Her strength surprised him. She held him easily, calling for medics. The last thing Lucas saw before darkness took him was her face. Those amethyst eyes filled with something that went beyond gratitude, something deeper and more intense. When Lucas woke again, he was in luxury. The room was spacious, with walls of polished stone and a ceiling that showed a holographic sky. He lay in a bed that adjusted perfectly to his body, more comfortable than anything he had experienced. Medical devices hummed softly around him, monitoring his vitals and delivering treatments directly into his bloodstream through a network of thin tubes. He tried to sit up and found he could do so without pain. His ribs were still sore, but the sharp agony was gone. He looked down at himself and saw that his wounds had been professionally treated, covered with translucent bandages that glowed faintly. Through them, he could see his skin healing at an impossible rate, the deep gashes already closing. "You should rest," a voice said. Lucas turned to see Mariani sitting in a chair by the window. She wore simple robes now, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the soft light, she looked ethereal, almost unreal. "How long?" Lucas asked. 3 days, she replied, standing and approaching the bed. "Your injuries were severe. Human physiology is tougher than we expected, but also slower to heal. Our physicians have been working constantly. Lucas absorbed this. The girls? Safe. Unharmed thanks to you. Mariani sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that Lucas could see the faint lines around her eyes, marks of stress and worry. They've been here every day asking about you. I had to convince them to let you rest. Where are we? My family estate on Virilia Prime. It's the safest place in the sector. Mariani's expression darkened. The attack on the Celestial Harmony was not random, Lucas. It was an assassination attempt. Someone paid the Roni Raiders to kill me and my daughters, to end my house's bloodline. Lucas absorbed this, his military mind immediately going to questions of security and threat assessment. Your husband? Mariani's face showed pain, but also anger. Deceased. 2 cycles ago, officially in battle. But I have evidence now that suggests poison, a slow-acting neurotoxin that mimicked battlefield trauma. She paused, her hands clenching. The trail leads to Lord Robini, head of House Thren. He seeks to absorb my house's holdings and power. And you've been waiting for proof, Lucas said, understanding. Moving against another house without evidence would start a war. You understand politics, Mariani said, a slight smile touching her lips. Yes, but now, with this attack, with witnesses and evidence, I can act. The council will have no choice but to investigate, and when they do, Robini will fall. She leaned back, studying him. You should know something else. The physicians were amazed by what you did in that jungle. They studied the predator's remains, analyzed the wounds, reconstructed the battle. You fought for 9 hours straight, Lucas. 9 hours without rest, with broken ribs and multiple lacerations. You killed creatures that weigh 3 times your mass, that have natural weapons designed by millions of years of evolution. One physician told me that by all biological logic, you should have died in the first hour. Lucas said nothing, remembering that night. The endless waves of predators, the weight of his sword growing heavier with each swing, the taste of blood in his mouth, the way his vision had narrowed to just the entrance of the cave, and the 2 small forms behind him. My daughters told me something, Mariani continued, her voice softer now. They said that during the worst of it, when the predators were pressing hardest, you spoke to them. You told them stories about Earth, about oceans and mountains, about cities and forests. You kept talking, kept your voice steady, even as you fought. They said it made them feel safe, knowing you were still there, still protecting them. Lucas remembered that too. The sound of his own voice had been an anchor, something to focus on besides the pain and exhaustion. He had told them about his childhood in the Rocky Mountains, about climbing peaks and swimming in cold lakes. He had described the Aurora Borealis, the Grand Canyon, the redwood forests. He had given them pieces of his world while defending them in this alien one. They are remarkable girls, Lucas said finally. They never panicked, never made my job harder. Nellis especially showed incredible composure for someone so young. Mariani's eyes glistened with tears. They learned that from their father. He was a good man, Lucas. Even if our marriage was arranged, he taught them to be strong, to think clearly under pressure. I am grateful he had that time with them before. She trailed off, unable to finish. Lucas reached out and took her hand, and they sat together in comfortable silence, the beginning of something deeper forming between them. She leaned forward, and Lucas was struck again by her beauty, but also by the strength he saw there. This was not a woman to be underestimated. But that is not why I wanted to speak with you. Captain Pearson completed his count. You killed exactly 100 predators that night. Combined with the raiders on the ship and the predator at the crash site, you have taken more than 120 lives to protect my daughters. Lucas wanted to say it was his duty, that he was just doing his job. But Mariani held up a hand. In Virillian culture, such an act creates a sacred bond. The traditional response is for the family to offer the Savior a place within the house, to make them one of us through the rite of unity. It is an ancient ceremony, rarely performed, and it carries weight both socially and politically. She paused, her eyes searching his. But I will not force this upon you. You are human, not Virillian, and you have your own culture and obligations. If you wish to return to Earth, I will arrange it with full honors and rewards. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to undergo the rite. She trailed off, and for the first time, Lucas saw vulnerability in her face. It would mean more to me than you can know. Lucas thought about it. He had no family on Earth, no close attachments. His life had been the military, deployment after deployment, never settling, never belonging. And here, in this strange place, he had found something unexpected. He had found purpose, and perhaps, looking at Mariani's hopeful face, something more. "What does this rite involve?" he asked carefully. Mariani's expression brightened. "It is complex, but the essence is simple. You would be formally adopted into House Velestron, given status and protection equal to my own. You would be bound to protect the house and its interests, and in return, the house would be bound to protect and support you." She hesitated. "There is also a personal component. The rite can be performed as a simple adoption, or it can be more. It can forge a deeper bond, one of partnership and unity." Lucas understood what she was implying, and he realized with surprise that the idea didn't bother him. In fact, there was a pull between them, something that had been there since that first meeting in the Grand Hall. He thought about the way she had looked at him when she found him at the cave, the intensity in her eyes. This was not just about gratitude or duty. "I need to think about it," Lucas said finally. Mariani nodded, standing. "Of course, take the time you need. The offer stands." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Lucas, thank you. For my daughters, for everything. You gave me back my world." After she left, Lucas lay back and stared at the holographic sky. His mind churned with possibilities and questions. But underneath it all was a certainty. His life had changed irrevocably. He could go back to Earth, back to being Commander Lucas, soldier and protector, or he could stay here and become something new. Over the next few days, as Lucas recovered, he spent time exploring the estate and getting to know Nellis and Fabelli better. The girls followed him everywhere, chattering in a mixture of English and Varillian, showing him their favorite spots in the vast gardens. They told him about their father, whom they barely remembered, and their mother, whom they adored. Lucas found himself growing attached to them, these brave little souls who had been through so much. He also spent time with Captain Pearson, who had taken a liking to the human. Pearson was a career soldier, scarred by decades of combat, and he respected strength when he saw it. They talked tactics and strategy, and Pearson showed Lucas the evidence they had gathered against Lord Robiny. "It's subtle," Pearson said, spreading documents across a table in the estate's library. "The poison was administered over months, probably through food or drink. It degraded the nervous system slowly, making it look like battle stress and fatigue. By the time the physicians realized something was wrong, it was too late." Lucas studied the medical reports, recognizing the symptoms, even though the terminology was alien. "How do you know it was Robini?" Pearson pulled out another document, this one a financial record. "Transactions. Large sums paid to a medical facility known for producing exotic toxins. The payments trace back through shell companies, but we followed the trail. It ends at House Thren. And the attack on the ship. Robiny hired the raiders through intermediaries, but we captured one of his agents. Under interrogation, he confessed." Pearson's face was grim. "Robini thought he could eliminate Mariani and her daughters, claim it was pirates, and the council would have no choice but to let him absorb House Velestron's holdings to maintain stability." Lucas felt anger building. He had seen this kind of political maneuvering before. Powerful men willing to kill for more power. What's Mariani going to do? Present the evidence to the council. Demand justice. But Robiny is powerful, and he has allies. It will be a battle, one fought with words and politics, not weapons. "Unless he decides to escalate," Lucas said. Pearson nodded grimly. "Unless he decides to escalate." The days passed, and Lucas found himself drawn deeper into the life of House Velestron. Nellis and Fabelli showed him their favorite hiding spots in the gardens, taught him words in Varillian, and made him tell them stories about Earth. They wanted to know everything: what humans ate, how they lived, what the animals looked like. Lucas found himself describing elephants and whales, mountains and deserts, thunderstorms and snowfall. The girls listened with rapt attention, their eyes wide with wonder. One afternoon, Nellis asked him to teach them how to fight. "Like you did," she said seriously, "so we can protect ourselves if bad things happen again." Lucas looked at Mariani, who had joined them in the garden. She nodded slowly. "They should know how to defend themselves. But they're young, Lucas. Be careful." Lucas started with the basics: awareness, positioning, how to identify threats. He taught them that fighting was always the last option, that running and hiding were often smarter choices, but he also taught them how to stand, how to hold a knife properly, how to strike if they had no other choice. The girls took it seriously, understanding that these were not games but lessons that might one day save their lives. Fabelli struggled at first, her natural gentleness making her hesitate. But Nellis took to it like a natural, her fierce determination driving her to master each technique. Lucas saw echoes of Mariani in her, that same core of steel wrapped in grace. During one training session, a small knife Lucas had given Nellis to practice was slipped from her hand and nearly struck Fabelli. Both girls froze, shocked at how close they had come to disaster. Lucas knelt between them and spoke quietly but firmly about responsibility, about how weapons demanded respect and control. He saw tears in their eyes, understood their fear, and held them both until they calmed. "Every warrior makes mistakes," he told them. "What matters is learning from them. You'll be more careful now, won't you?" They nodded, and from that day forward, they treated their training with even more seriousness. Lucas also began training with Pearson and the House Guards, learning Varillian fighting techniques and teaching them some earth combat methods in return. The sessions were intense, and Lucas found himself challenged in new ways. The Varillians fought with elegance and precision, their movements flowing like dance. His own style was more brutal, more direct, but he began to see how the two approaches could complement each other. One evening, a messenger arrived at the estate with urgent news. A trade convoy belonging to House Velestron had been attacked on the frontier. 3 ships destroyed, all crew lost. The message was clear. Someone was making moves against Mariani's interests. Pearson immediately suspected Robini, but there was no proof. Mariani called a council in her private study. Lucas attended, along with Pearson and several senior advisors. Maps were spread across a table, showing trade routes and territories. Mariani's face was grave as she studied the reports. "This is the 3rd attack in 2 months," she said. "The pattern is clear. Someone is trying to weaken us economically before the council convenes to review Robini's case. If we lose enough resources, other houses might question your ability to lead," one advisor said. "They could argue that House Thren should absorb your holdings for stability." "Which is exactly what Robini wants," Pearson growled. "He's attacking us indirectly, using pirates and mercenaries as cover." Lucas studied the map, his military mind analyzing patterns. "These attacks aren't random," he said, pointing to 3 marked locations. "Look at the positioning. They're hitting your most profitable routes, the ones that fund your house's operations, and they're doing it in areas where you have minimal patrol coverage." Everyone turned to look at him. Mariani leaned forward, interested. "Go on." "Whoever is planning this knows your operations intimately," Lucas continued. "They know which convoys to hit for maximum impact, and they know exactly where your defenses are weakest. This isn't just Robini. He has someone on the inside, feeding him information." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Mariani's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "A spy in my house." Pearson slammed his fist on the table. "I'll find them. I'll interrogate every person who has access to that information." "No," Mariani said sharply. "If we show our hand, they'll go to ground or be eliminated by their handler. We need to be smarter." She looked at Lucas. "You have experience with this kind of situation?" Lucas nodded. "Military intelligence was part of my training. We need to identify who has access to your shipping schedules and route information, then feed them false information and see who bites." Over the next week, Lucas and Pearson worked together to set a trap. They created fake shipping manifests showing a valuable convoy taking a specific route. Only 5 people in the household had access to this information. Then they waited. 3 days later, pirates attacked the route. But instead of a vulnerable convoy, they found a fully armed patrol ship waiting for them. The pirates were captured, and under interrogation, they revealed they had been hired through intermediaries and given detailed information about the target. The trail led back to one of Mariani's junior advisors, a Varillian named Samuel, who had been in financial difficulty and had been bought by House Thren. The revelation shook the household. Samuel had been with House Velestron for years, trusted and valued. His betrayal cut deep. Mariani was forced to have him arrested and turned over to the council for trial. The man had looked her in the eye and apologized, claiming he had done it for his family, that Robini had threatened his children if he didn't cooperate. That night, Lucas found Mariani alone in her chambers, staring out at the night sky. He could see the weight of leadership on her shoulders, the burden of making decisions that affected so many lives. "You did the right thing," Lucas said softly, joining her at the window. "Did I?" Mariani's voice was heavy with doubt. "Samuel has a family, Lucas. Children younger than my daughters. Robiny used that against him, made him choose between loyalty and love. Can I really blame him for choosing his children?" "Yes," Lucas said firmly, "because his choice put your children at risk. It put you at risk. I understand desperation. I understand being in an impossible situation, but the moment his actions endangered innocence, he crossed a line." Mariani turned to face him, tears in her eyes. "Sometimes I hate this. The politics, the games, the way people become pieces on a board to be moved and sacrificed. I want to be just Mariani, just a mother to my daughters, not a high counselor playing deadly games with lives." Lucas pulled her into his arms, holding her as she cried. It was the first time he had seen her truly vulnerable, stripped of her armor of authority and power. She was just a woman, tired and scared and doing her best in an impossible situation. "You're both," Lucas said quietly. "You're a mother and a leader, and you're doing what you must to protect your children and your people. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's courage." Mariani looked up at him, and in that moment something shifted between them. The attraction that had been building, the connection forged through shared danger and trust, crystallized into something deeper. She reached up and pulled him down to her, and they kissed with a desperation born of stress and fear and the need for human connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Mariani rested her forehead against his chest. "The ceremony is in 3 days," she whispered. "Once it's done, we'll be bound together officially. But I don't want to wait, Lucas. I don't want to spend another night alone." Lucas understood what she was asking, what she was offering. He lifted her chin and looked into those amethyst eyes. "Are you sure? This changes everything." "Everything changed the moment you picked up my daughters and ran," Mariani replied. "Everything changed when you stood at that cave entrance and fought 100 monsters. This is just making it official." Lucas kissed her again, and this time, neither held back. The ceremony was scheduled for the next day. Lucas had agreed to the rite, had chosen to stay and become part of House Velestron. Mariani had been radiant when he told her, and they had spent long hours discussing what it would mean, both politically and personally. They were dancing around something, both of them aware of the attraction but cautious about acting on it. The night before the ceremony, Lucas walked through the gardens. The Varillian night was beautiful, 3 moons visible in the sky, casting silver light over the carefully tended plants. He found a bench near a fountain and sat, his mind quiet for the first time in days. "Couldn't sleep either," Mariani's voice came from behind him. Lucas turned to see her approaching, dressed in simple robes that flowed around her like water. Her hair was down, and in the moonlight, she looked like some ancient goddess. "Thinking about tomorrow," Lucas admitted as she sat beside him. "Nervous?" "A little. It's a big step." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the fountain and the night sounds of the garden. Then Mariani spoke, her voice soft. "I need to tell you something. My husband, before he died, he was distant. Our marriage was arranged, political, and while we came to respect each other, there was never passion, never true connection. I have been alone for 2 years, raising my daughters, running my house, and feeling empty." She turned to look at him, and Lucas saw tears in her eyes. "When I thought I had lost Nellius and Fabelli, when I saw the ship exploding, I felt like my world was ending. And then I found them, found you, saw what you had done. You, a stranger, had given everything to protect them, and I realized that what I felt wasn't just gratitude." Lucas reached out and took her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth, but the warmth beneath was real. "I feel it too," he said simply. "I don't understand it, can't explain it, but it's there." Mariani's face lit up with a smile that took his breath away. She leaned forward and their lips met. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, 2 people from different worlds exploring something new. Then it deepened, and Lucas felt heat building between them. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Tomorrow," Mariani whispered, "when we complete the rite, it will bind us together. Not just politically, but truly. Are you ready for that?" I've never been more ready for anything in my life, Lucas replied. The next day dawned bright and clear. Lucas dressed in formal attire provided by the house, a simple but elegant outfit in dark blue and silver, the colors of House Velestran. His wounds were healed enough that he could move without pain, though scars marked his arms and chest, permanent reminders of that night in the cave. The ceremony was to be held in the estate's great hall, with witnesses from other houses and members of the council present. Lucas felt nervous as Pearson led him to an antechamber to wait. "You're doing the right thing," Pearson said. "Mariani needs someone strong beside her, especially now." Before Lucas could respond, alarms blared throughout the estate. Pearson's face went pale, and he grabbed his communicator. "Report!" A frantic voice came through. "Attack, multiple breaches. Armed forces, identified as Robinese mercenaries. They're everywhere." Lucas and Pearson looked at each other, then moved as one, grabbing weapons from a nearby armory. Lucas chose a sword and a pair of knives, while Pearson took a spear and a shield. They ran toward the great hall where Lucas knew Mariani and the girls would be. The estate was chaos. Robinese forces, professional soldiers all, had struck at multiple points simultaneously. They wore black armor and carried an array of weapons: swords, spears, bows. This was no raid. This was an invasion. Lucas saw members of the household guard fighting desperately, but they were outnumbered and outflanked. Lucas and Pearson fought through two groups of attackers, their weapons moving with practiced efficiency. Lucas's human reflexes, honed on Earth's higher gravity, gave him a slight edge. He moved faster than the Varillians expected, his blade finding gaps in armor, his knives striking with lethal precision. They reached the great hall to find it surrounded. Robinese forces had cornered Mariani, Nellius, and Fabelli in a garden pavilion. The girls' tutors lay dead, and Mariani stood with a spear in hand, blood on her robes protecting her daughters with fierce determination. But she was alone against a dozen attackers. "No," Lucas breathed, and then he was running. Pearson shouted something, but Lucas didn't hear it. All he could see was Nellies, brave little Nellies, being held by a mercenary with a knife to her throat. Lucas drew one of his knives and threw it in one fluid motion, years of training guiding his hand. The blade flew true, striking the mercenary in the throat. The man's grip loosened, and Nellies, remembering what Lucas had taught her during their days in the jungle, went limp and dropped. Lucas was there, sword singing, cutting down two more attackers before they could react. Mariani saw him, and their eyes met. No words were needed. She moved to protect Fabelli, while Lucas created space, his blade weaving a deadly pattern. Pearson arrived with reinforcements, and suddenly the tide turned. The attackers fell back, and Lucas scooped up Nellies. The girl clung to him, trembling but unhurt. "The bunker," Mariani gasped, bleeding from a wound on her shoulder. "Captain, get the girls to safety." Pearson nodded and took both girls, despite their protests. "Stay with him," Nellies shouted at her mother. "Stay with Lucas." Then they were gone, and Lucas and Mariani stood alone in the pavilion, surrounded by the dead and dying. They could hear fighting throughout the estate, the sounds of battle echoing through the halls. "Robini," Mariani said, her voice cold with fury, "he knows we have evidence. This is his last desperate move." "Then let's end it," Lucas said. They moved through the estate together, and Lucas marveled at how naturally they fought as a team. Mariani was fast and precise, her spear striking like a snake, while Lucas was power and aggression, his sword cutting through defenses. They complemented each other perfectly, and the mercenaries learned to fear them. They found Robini in the estate's upper gallery, a tall Varillian with pale blue skin and cold eyes. He wore ornate armor and carried a rapier, the mark of a duelist. Around him stood his personal guard, the best fighters his house could buy. "Mariani," Rubini said, his voice smooth and cultured, "I had hoped to avoid this unpleasantness. If you had simply accepted my offer of marriage, none of this would have been necessary." "You killed my husband," Mariani said, her voice shaking with rage. "You tried to kill my daughters, and you dare speak of marriage?" Robini shrugged. "Politics is brutal, my dear. Your house has resources I need, and you refuse to negotiate. What choice did I have?" "The choice to act with honor," Lucas said, stepping forward. "But I guess that's beyond you." Robini's eyes flicked to Lucas dismissively. "Ah, the pet human, the savage who got lucky in a jungle. Do you really think you can stand against me?" I am a master of the blade, trained since childhood in the art of combat. Lucas said nothing. He simply drew his sword and set his stance. Robiny smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes, and gestured to his guards. Kill them both. The guards attacked and Lucas met them head-on. These were not raiders or jungle predators. These were trained soldiers. But Lucas had spent a lifetime fighting, and he had something they didn't. He had something to fight for. He thought of Neleus and Fabelli, of Mariani, of the life he had chosen, and he fought with everything he had. His sword moved in patterns learned on a dozen battlefields, each strike calculated to disable or kill. He used his earthborn strength to his advantage, moving faster and hitting harder than they expected. One guard fell, then another. Mariani was beside him, her spear flashing, and together they carved through Robiny's elite. When the last guard fell, only Robiny remained. The Lord's confident smile had faded, replaced by fear and anger. He lunged at Lucas, his rapier a blur of silver in the light. Lucas parried, feeling the jar of impact up his arms. Robiny was good, better than Lucas had expected. The rapier moved like a living thing, seeking gaps, probing defenses. But Lucas had learned to fight on a world where a mistake meant death. He had survived 100 monsters in a single night, and he was not about to lose to a politician with a sword. He feinted high, and when Robiny moved to block, Lucas dropped low and swept the Virilion's legs. Robiny fell hard, his rapier clattering away. Lucas was on him instantly, his sword at the Lord's throat. Do it, Mariani said, her voice hard. He deserves death. Lucas looked at Robiny, saw the fear in his eyes, and felt nothing but disgust. This man had killed Mariani's husband, had tried to murder children, all for power and greed. It would be easy to push the blade home, to end him. But Lucas lowered his sword. No, he said. He'll face justice. The council will see the evidence, will hear the testimony of his mercenaries. His house will be stripped, his name disgraced. That's a fate worse than death for someone like him. Mariani looked at Lucas with surprise and respect. Then she nodded. Captain Pearson, she called, and the captain appeared with guards. Take Lord Robiny into custody. Ensure he lives to stand trial. As the guards dragged Robiny away, the former lord screaming about injustice and betrayal, Lucas felt Mariani's hand on his arm. That was mercy, she said softly. That was justice, Lucas corrected. He doesn't get to escape into death. He has to live with what he's done. Mariani pulled him close, and they stood together among the aftermath of battle. Two warriors who had found something unexpected. Home. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Lord Robiny's trial was swift and damning. The evidence Mariani and Pearson had gathered, combined with the testimony of captured mercenaries, left no doubt of his guilt. He was found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and treason against the Virillion Consortium. His house was dissolved, his holdings distributed, and he was exiled to a penal colony on a harsh frontier world. His political career, his legacy, everything he had killed for, was destroyed. The council also investigated the Roni Raider attack and found definitive proof that Robiny had arranged it. The surviving diplomats from Earth were compensated, and relations between humanity and the Virillion Consortium were actually strengthened by the incident. Lucas became something of a hero in diplomatic circles, the human who had saved a High Counselor's children at tremendous personal cost. But to Lucas, none of that mattered as much as what came next. The rite of unity was rescheduled and performed with full ceremony. Lucas stood before the assembled council, witnesses from dozens of houses, and formally pledged himself to House Velestron. Mariani placed a silver torque around his neck, the symbol of his new status, and spoke the ancient words that made him one of her house. But there was more. In the private ceremony that followed, witnessed only by Pearson and a handful of close family, Lucas and Mariani completed the personal aspect of the rite. They exchanged vows, not as strangers brought together by circumstance, but as two people who had found love in the most unlikely of places. They bound themselves together, not just for politics or duty, but because they chose to. The celebration lasted 3 days, and at the end of it, Lucas found himself with a new family. Neleus and Fabelli called him father without hesitation, and he discovered that he loved them as if they were his own blood. They were brave and clever, and they had survived because of their courage and their trust in him. He would protect them for the rest of his life. Months passed. Lucas adapted to his new life, learning the intricacies of Virillian politics and culture. He became Mariani's closest advisor and protector, and together they strengthened House Velestron's position. But his favorite moments were the simple ones, teaching the girls to defend themselves, walking through the gardens with Mariani as she spoke of her plans and dreams, and the quiet nights when they lay together, content in each other's presence. And then came the news that would change everything again. Mariani was pregnant. The physicians had not thought it possible. The genetic differences between humans and Virillians, too great. But life found a way. Perhaps it was the rite itself, the ancient ceremony drawing on forces not fully understood. Perhaps it was simply the universe's way of saying that love transcended biology. The pregnancy was difficult, the physicians uncertain and worried, but Mariani was strong. And when the time came, when Lucas held his son for the first time, he felt something break and reform inside his chest. The boy was perfect. He had light blue skin, lighter than his mother's, but definitely Virillian. His eyes were the most remarkable feature. They shifted colors, from brown to violet and back again, as if they couldn't decide which parent to favor. The physicians declared him healthy and unique, the first human Virillian hybrid in history. They named him Andon, a name that meant new beginning in both English and Virillian. Nellis and Fabelli were enchanted with their new brother. They spent hours watching him, making sure he was comfortable, fighting over who got to hold him next. Lucas watched his family, this impossible, wonderful family, and felt complete. But peace, as Lucas had learned throughout his life, was often temporary. When Andon was 6 months old, word reached the estate that a ship had crashed in the wilderness beyond the settlement borders. The survivors were asking for help, claiming to be merchants whose vessel had been damaged by a meteor storm. Captain Pearson was suspicious from the start. "It doesn't add up," Pearson told Lucas as they studied the reports in the estate's command center. "A meteor storm in that sector? The navigation charts show no such activity. And why land so far from any settlement? There are 3 cities they could have reached." Lucas trusted Pearson's instincts. The captain had fought beside him against Robini's forces and had proven himself both shrewd and loyal. "What do you think it is?" "A trap, or worse, slavers. There have been reports of raiders targeting families with young children, especially those of high status." Pearson's jaw tightened. With the news of Andon spreading across the consortium, every criminal organization knows about the hybrid child of House Velestron. The thought made Lucas's blood run cold. He had made enemies since joining Mariani's house, not just through the downfall of Robini, but by his very existence. Some traditional Virillians saw him as an outsider who had no right to the position he held. Others saw him as a useful pawn in their political games, and some saw his family as targets. "We need to investigate," Lucas said. "If it's legitimate, those people need help. If it's a trap, we need to eliminate the threat before it reaches the estate." Mariani agreed when they presented the situation to her. "Take a team," she said, her hand resting protectively on Andon's cradle. "But be careful. The girls have already lost one father. I will not have them lose another." Lucas assembled a small but skilled team. Pearson, 3 of the house guards who had proven themselves in battle, and Samuel, a human scout who had arrived on Virillia as part of a follow-up diplomatic mission and had chosen to stay. Samuel was young but sharp, with skills in tracking and wilderness survival that rivaled Lucas's own. They set out at dawn, traveling in a ground vehicle that could handle the rough terrain. The crash site was 2 days' journey from the estate, through dense forests similar to the ones where Lucas had fought the 100 predators. The landscape triggered memories, and Lucas found his hand constantly checking his weapons. A sword across his back, knives at his belt, a bow and quiver of arrows. He had learned to appreciate ranged weapons since that night in the cave. The forest was alive with sounds. Birds with blue and green plumage called from the canopy, and Lucas spotted several of the horse-sized predators in the distance. Though they kept their distance from the vehicle, the wilderness here was still wild, untamed by Virillian settlement, and it reminded Lucas of Earth's frontiers before humanity had spread across the globe. They reached the crash site on the evening of the 2nd day. The ship was indeed damaged, its hull scorched and torn, but as Lucas and Samuel circled the perimeter, they found something disturbing. The damage patterns were wrong. Instead of the random impacts of meteors, there were precise cuts, the kind made by tools or weapons. "This ship was sabotage," Samuel said quietly, crouching to examine the ground. "And look here," boot prints. At least 20 individuals, maybe more. They're trying to make it look like they're camping near the wreck, but the pattern is all wrong. It's a perimeter guard formation. Lucas signaled the team to fall back. They retreated to a defensive position on a hilltop overlooking the crash site and waited. As darkness fell, Lucas's suspicions were confirmed. Figures emerged from the ship, too many for a simple merchant crew. They were armed with spears, bows, and swords, and they moved with military precision. Mercenaries, Pearson growled, probably the remnants of Robinese forces looking for revenge. But Lucas saw something else. Among the figures were several who moved differently, with a predatory grace that reminded him of the Roni raiders. Not just mercenaries, he said. They've hired Roni as muscle. The situation was worse than they'd thought. A direct assault would be suicide against those numbers. But Lucas couldn't simply leave. If these forces were planning to attack the estate, he needed to know their strength and intentions. He made a decision that Pearson immediately opposed. "You can't go in there alone," Pearson hissed. "I can and I will," Lucas replied. "I'm a soldier, Captain. Reconnaissance is part of the job. Stay here, keep watch. If I'm not back by dawn, return to the estate and warn Mariani." Before Pearson could argue further, Lucas was moving. He left his sword behind, taking only his knives and his bow. He moved through the forest like a shadow, using skills honed on Earth and sharpened by his time on this alien world. The guards were good, but they were watching for vehicles in large groups, not a single man trained in infiltration. Lucas reached the ship's perimeter and listened. The mercenaries were speaking in Varillian, discussing their plans. What he heard made his blood boil. They were indeed planning to attack the estate, but not directly. Their goal was to kidnap Andon, the hybrid child, and use him as leverage to force Mariani to surrender her house's holdings. The man leading them was introduced as Peregrine, a mercenary captain who had lost his contract when Robiny fell. "The child is the key," Peregrine was saying. "House Velestrin's strength comes from their alliance with the humans. Take the hybrid, and we control that alliance. The council will have no choice but to negotiate with us." Lucas had heard enough. He started to retreat when a branch cracked under his foot. Every head turned toward the sound, and suddenly lights blazed in his direction. Lucas ran, arrows whistling past him in the darkness. He heard the Roni chittering as they gave chase, their multiple legs carrying them faster than any Varillian. Lucas's mind raced as he fled through the forest. He couldn't lead them back to Pearson's position, couldn't risk the whole team. He changed direction, angling toward a ravine he had spotted during their approach. The Roni were close behind, their night vision superior to his own. An arrow caught him in the shoulder, and Lucas grunted with pain but kept running. He reached the ravine and jumped, landing hard on the other side. The Roni hesitated at the gap, and Lucas used those precious seconds to pull the arrow from his shoulder. The wound burned, but it wasn't deep. He was bleeding, but he could still fight. The Roni found another way across, but by then Lucas had set a trap. He had strung his bow and positioned himself behind a fallen log. When the first Roni emerged from the undergrowth, Lucas's arrow took it in the throat. The creature fell without a sound. The second Roni was more cautious, but Lucas had already moved, circling behind it. His knife found the gap between its chitinous plates, and it went down. 3 more came, and Lucas abandoned stealth for speed. He moved through the forest, leading them away from Pearson's team, using every trick he knew. He set false trails, doubled back, used the terrain against them. By dawn, he had killed 5 Roni and wounded 3 more, and the pursuit had ended. The mercenaries had called back their hunters, unwilling to lose more in the forest. Lucas made his way back to the hilltop where Pearson waited with the team. The captain's relief was visible when Lucas emerged from the trees, blood-soaked and exhausted. "We need to get back to the estate," Lucas said without preamble. "They're coming for Andon." The journey back took them a day and a half, pushing the vehicle to its limits. They arrived at the estate to find Mariani had already taken precautions, moving the children to the secure bunker and doubling the guard. Lucas briefed her on everything he'd learned, and together they began planning their defense. "We could wait for them to come to us," Mariani said, studying a map of the surrounding terrain. "Use the estate's defenses. Or we could take the fight to them," Lucas countered. "Hit them before they're ready on ground of our choosing." Pearson agreed with Lucas. "Peregrine is arrogant. He thinks we don't know he's there. If we strike now, we have surprise on our side." Mariani looked at Lucas, saw the determination in his eyes, and nodded. "Then we strike. But I'm coming with you." Mariani! Lucas started to protest, but she cut him off. They're threatening my child, Lucas. Our child. I will not sit behind walls while others fight this battle. I am High Counselor of House Velestron, and I will defend my family. Lucas saw the steel in her eyes and knew there was no point arguing. They assembled a strike force of 30 soldiers, the best fighters in the house's service. Among them was Rose, a human woman who had joined the household as a linguist, but had proven herself capable with a bow. She was quiet and efficient, and Lucas was glad to have another Earthborn fighter beside him. They moved out that night, leaving a defensive force at the estate under Pearson's command. Lucas had wanted the captain to come, but someone needed to guard the children, and Pearson was the only one he trusted completely with that task. Nellies had hugged him fiercely before he left, whispering, "Come back, Papa. We need you." The title, Papa, still caught Lucas off guard sometimes. These girls who had survived so much, who had seen him at his most violent and his most gentle, had claimed him as their father, and he had claimed them as his daughters. Nothing would stop him from returning to them. The strike force reached the crash site just before dawn. Lucas and Samuel had scouted ahead, confirming that Peregrine's mercenaries were still there, unprepared for an attack. Lucas positioned archers on the high ground, while Mariani led the main force in a flanking maneuver. When the first light of dawn broke, Lucas gave the signal. Arrows fell like rain on the camp below. The mercenaries scrambled for weapons and cover, but they were caught completely by surprise. The Roni warriors emerged from the ship, their armor gleaming, but Lucas's archers had prepared for them. Fire arrows struck the ship's hull, and the dry wood of the surrounding forest caught quickly. Smoke filled the camp, creating chaos. Lucas led a small team down from the high ground, moving through the confusion with deadly purpose. He was looking for Peregrine, needed to end this threat at its source. He found the mercenary captain trying to organize a defense, shouting orders to his scattered forces. Their eyes met across the smoky battlefield, and Peregrine's face twisted with hate. "The human pet," he snarled. "You should have died in that jungle." "I've heard that before," Lucas replied, drawing his sword. "Funny how I'm still here." Peregrine was good, Lucas had to admit. The mercenary captain wielded a pair of short swords with skill and speed, his blue skin slick with sweat as they fought. But Lucas had fought raiders, predators, and assassins. He had survived 100 monsters in a single night. One mercenary, no matter how skilled, was not going to stop him. The fight was brutal and short. Peregrine's dual swords were fast, but Lucas's single blade was placed with precision. He deflected a strike, stepped inside Peregrine's guard, and drove his sword through the mercenary's chest. Peregrine looked down at the blade in shock, then up at Lucas. You're just human," Peregrine gasped. "I'm a father protecting his children," Lucas replied coldly. "That makes me more dangerous than you can imagine." Peregrine collapsed, and with his fall, the remaining mercenaries lost their will to fight. Those who weren't killed in the battle scattered into the forest. The Roni warriors, seeing their employers defeated, retreated to their ship and managed to get it airborne despite the damage. Lucas let them go. He had achieved his objective. The threat was ended. Mariani found him standing over Peregrine's body, her armor scorched but her eyes fierce with pride. "It's done," she said simply. "For now," Lucas replied. "There will always be another threat, another enemy seeking what we have." "Then we will face them together," Mariani said, taking his hand, "as we always have." They returned to the estate to find Nellies and Fabelli waiting anxiously in the courtyard, with Pearson keeping watch over them. The girls ran to Lucas and Mariani, and the family embraced, reunited and safe once more. Andon was sleeping peacefully in the nursery, unaware that his parents had just fought a battle to protect his future. In the weeks that followed, Lucas increased the estate's defenses and began training a new security force. But he also did something else. He began training Nellies and Fabelli. They were 9 years old now, old enough to begin learning to protect themselves. Mariani agreed, understanding that in a universe where political enemies could strike at any moment, her daughters needed to be able to defend themselves. The training started simply, with basic exercises to build strength and coordination. Lucas worked with them every morning in the estate's practice yard, teaching them footwork and balance. Rose joined the sessions, helping with archery instruction, while Pearson taught them strategy and tactical thinking. Nellies took to it naturally, her small frame proving deceptively strong. She favored the bow, her aim improving rapidly with practice. Fabelli was more interested in close combat, and Lucas taught her knife work, showing her how to use an opponent's size and strength against them. The key is not to fight fair, Lucas told them one morning as they practiced with wooden training weapons. You are small, and you will likely face opponents who are bigger and stronger. Use that. Be fast, be smart, and never hesitate. When you commit to a strike, follow through. Nellis landed a hit on his training pad, and Lucas grinned with pride. Good. Again, but this time faster. They trained for months, and Lucas saw them transform from frightened children into confident young fighters. They would never be warriors, but they could defend themselves, and that was what mattered. He remembered his own training on Earth, the harsh discipline that had forged him into a soldier. But with his daughters, he was different. He taught them strength, but also compassion, violence, but also when to show mercy. Andon grew quickly, and by his second birthday, he was already showing signs of the hybrid vigor that came from his mixed heritage. He was stronger than a Varillian child his age, but more agile than a human one. His eyes continued to shift colors, and he had developed a habit of mimicking everything Lucas did. When Lucas practiced with his sword, Andon would grab a stick and swing it around, his tiny face serious with concentration. He's going to be a handful, Mariani said one afternoon, watching their son attempt to climb a tree that was far too tall for him. Lucas caught him before he could fall, swinging the boy up onto his shoulders instead. He's perfect, Lucas said, feeling Andon's small hands grip his hair for balance. Just like his sisters, just like his mother. Flatterer, Mariani said, but she was smiling. Life settled into a rhythm. Lucas divided his time between family, training, and helping Mariani manage the house's affairs. His reputation continued to grow, not just for the 100 monsters he had killed, but for his tactical brilliance and unwavering loyalty. Other houses began approaching House Velestron for alliances, eager to have the legendary human warrior as a potential ally rather than enemy. But there were also whispers, rumors that made Lucas uneasy. Some traditionalists in the council spoke out against the mixing of species, calling Andon an abomination. There were anonymous threats, messages delivered in the night, promising violence against the hybrid child. Lucas increased security again, and he began sleeping lighter, always alert for danger. The danger came on a cold night when Andon was 3 years old. Lucas woke to the sound of breaking glass and was on his feet instantly, sword in hand. He heard Mariani moving in the darkness beside him, and they exchanged a glance before splitting up. She went to check on the children while Lucas moved toward the source of the sound. He found intruders in the main hall, 3 of them dressed in black and carrying weapons. They saw him and attacked without hesitation. Lucas met them head-on, his sword flashing in the dim light. These weren't mercenaries or raiders. They moved with the precision of trained assassins. Lucas killed the first with a thrust through the throat, parried the second strike, and drove his knife into the attacker's ribs. The third was the most skilled, and they fought through the hall in a deadly dance. Lucas could hear sounds of fighting elsewhere in the estate, knew that this was a coordinated attack. He needed to end this quickly and get to his family. He feinted left, and when the assassin moved to block, Lucas reversed his grip on his sword and brought the pommel down on the man's skull. The assassin dropped, unconscious. Lucas ran toward the children's rooms and found Mariani fighting off 2 more attackers. She was wounded, blood running down her arm, but she fought with fierce determination. Lucas took down one attacker from behind, then helped Mariani dispatch the other. The children? Lucas gasped. Safe. Pearson has them in the bunker. Mariani's face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were hard. They were after Andon specifically. 2 of them made it to his room before I stopped them. Lucas felt rage building. These cowards had come for his son, had tried to kill a child in his bed. He checked Mariani's wound, relieved to find it shallow. Then they moved through the estate together, clearing each room. By the time dawn broke, 6 attackers lay dead, and 3 more had been captured. The captured assassins refused to talk, even under interrogation. But Pearson found something in their clothing, a symbol, a mark belonging to an extremist faction called the Purists. They were Varillians who believed in species purity, who saw any mixing of bloodlines as an affront to their culture. They're zealots, Pearson explained as they gathered in the command center. They've been growing in influence, especially among the outer colonies. The council has been monitoring them, but no one expected them to act so boldly. They came for my son, Lucas said, his voice dangerously quiet. They broke into my home, threatened my family. Where do they base themselves? Pearson hesitated. Lucas, we should let the council handle this. Where? Lucas repeated, and there was something in his tone that made Pearson step back. There's a compound on the northern continent. It's remote, heavily fortified. They call it Purity Keep. Lucas looked at Mariani. I'm going. We're going, Mariani corrected. They attacked our house, our family. This requires a response from House Velestran, and I am still its head. They assembled a larger force this time, 60 soldiers loyal to House Velestran. The journey to Purity Keep took 3 days by air transport, and when they arrived, Lucas understood why the extremists had chosen this location. The compound was built into a mountain, its walls carved from solid rock. Taking it by force would cost many lives. But Lucas had another idea. He approached the compound openly, carrying a white flag of parley. The purists, surprised by the bold move, allowed him to enter. He stood in their great hall surrounded by hostile faces and made his offer. Your assassins failed, he said bluntly. My son lives, and your people are dead or captured. You have one chance to end this. Send out your leader, and we settle this as warriors. Single combat to the death. If you win, my forces retreat and you live to fight another day. If I win, you disband this organization and leave my family in peace. The hall erupted in argument, but Lucas stood calmly, waiting. Finally, a tall Varillian stepped forward. His name was Seaton, and he was the founder of the Purists. He was older than most warriors, his blue skin darkened with age, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. I accept, Seaton said, but know this, human. But I have trained in combat for over 50 years. I am a master of every weapon known to our people. You will die here, and your abomination of a child will follow. Lucas's eyes went cold. Then come and try. They fought in the courtyard of the compound, surrounded by purists on one side and House Velestran soldiers on the other. Seaton wielded a long spear, using its reach to keep Lucas at a distance. The Varillian was indeed skilled, his movements precise and economical. But Lucas had learned patience in his years of combat. He waited, watched, and learned Seaton's patterns. The fight lasted longer than any Lucas had fought since that night with the 100 monsters. Seaton was relentless, his spear a constant threat. Lucas took several shallow wounds, each one burning, but he gave as good as he got. His sword found Seaton's shoulder, his knife scored a line across the Varillian's ribs. They were both bleeding, both exhausted, when Lucas saw his opening. Seaton overextended on a thrust and Lucas sidestepped, grabbing the spear shaft. He pulled Seaton off balance, dropped his sword, and drove his knife into the Varillian's heart. Seaton looked at Lucas with surprise and something like respect. You fight with honor, he gasped. Protect your son, human. He is unique. Then Seaton died, and the purists were without their leader. True to the agreement, they disbanded, and the threat to Andon's life was ended. Lucas stood in the courtyard, blood-soaked and victorious, and he felt no triumph. Only relief that his family was safe and weariness from yet another fight. Mariani came to him and helped him to the medical transport. How many more times? She asked softly. How many more fights until we have peace? As many as it takes, Lucas replied. I will fight 1,000 enemies if that's what it takes to give our children a chance to grow up safe. And he meant it. Every word. They returned to the estate to heal and rebuild. The attack had shaken the household, but it had also hardened their resolve. Nellis and Fabelli doubled their training efforts, determined to be able to protect their brother if danger came again. Andon, too young to understand what had happened, simply continued being a happy child, unaware that his father had killed again to keep him safe. Lucas's scars multiplied, new ones joining the old. His back was crisscrossed with marks from the jungle predators. His arms bore the signs of combat with raiders and assassins, and now his chest carried a reminder of his duel with Seaton. Each scar told a story, each one a moment when he had stood between his family and death. One evening, a year after Andon's birth, Lucas stood on the balcony of the estate, looking out over the gardens. The 3 moons were rising, painting everything in silver light. Behind him, he heard laughter. Mariani was chasing the twins through the hallways while Andon gurgled happily in his crib. But the peace was not meant to last. 2 months later, Pearson burst into Lucas's study with urgent news. "We have a problem. A ship arrived from the frontier carrying refugees from a House Thren settlement. They're claiming persecution, asking for sanctuary." Lucas looked up from the tactical reports he had been reviewing. Thren? As in Robini's house? The very same. After his exile, the house was dissolved, but some of the outlying settlements remain populated. Now they're suffering under new management and they're fleeing. Pearson's expression was troubled. Mariani wants to grant them sanctuary. It's the right thing to do, but it could be a trap, Lucas finished. He stood and walked to the window thinking. How many refugees? 53, mostly civilians, farmers, craftspeople, a few children. They came in a damaged transport, barely space-worthy. Our physicians are examining them now. I want to see them, Lucas said, before Mariani makes any official decision. The refugees were housed in a temporary shelter near the estate's outer walls. Lucas walked among them, observing. Most looked genuinely desperate, thin, exhausted, with the hollow eyes of people who had lost everything. Children clung to their parents, and the elderly sat quietly, their faces lined with suffering. But 3 men caught Lucas's attention. They were younger, stronger, and their eyes held something different. Not desperation, but calculation. They watched him watch them, and Lucas saw recognition flicker across their faces. They knew who he was. Lucas approached them casually, speaking in the Varillian he had learned. You've come far. The journey must have been difficult. The tallest of the 3, a scarred Varillian with pale blue skin, nodded. Difficult, yes, but necessary. The new lord showed us no mercy. And yet you all survived, Lucas observed. 53 people, on a ship that size for weeks in space. The rations must have been tight. We managed, the man said, but something flickered in his eyes. A tell. Lucas had interrogated enough prisoners to recognize when someone was hiding something. He returned to Pearson and pulled him aside. Those 3 men, the ones near the eastern wall, I want backgrounds on them. Everything you can find. Pearson didn't question, just nodded. Within hours, he had an answer. The tall one is named Seaton. Former mercenary, served in several border conflicts. The other 2, Peregrine and Trudy, similar backgrounds. All 3 were connected to House Thren's military forces. Lucas felt his instincts screaming. They're not refugees. They're assassins. We have no proof, Pearson cautioned. They could legitimately be fleeing. Then let's get proof, Lucas said. Postcards, but make them subtle. Watch those 3 constantly. If they make a move, we'll be ready. That night, Lucas lay awake beside Mariani, his mind unable to settle. She sensed his tension and rolled over to face him. What's wrong? He told her about his suspicions. Mariani listened carefully, then sighed. I had hoped for peace, at least for a little while. But if you're right, if they are here to hurt us, I won't let them touch you or the children, Lucas promised. Whatever their plan is, we'll stop it. I know you will, Mariani said, pressing close to him. You always do. 3 days later, Lucas's suspicions were confirmed. One of the guards spotted Seaton and his companions meeting in secret, assembling weapons they had smuggled in pieces among their belongings. They were planning to strike during the upcoming council gathering, when important guests would be present at the estate. The target wasn't just Mariani, but the entire council leadership, an attack that would plunge the consortium into chaos. Lucas coordinated with Pearson to move quickly. They couldn't simply arrest the 3 without evidence that would hold up in council courts. They needed to catch them in the act, but in a way that minimized risk to innocence. Lucas devised a plan. They would announce a small family celebration in the gardens, supposedly a private event. The assassins would think it was their chance to strike when security was lighter. But in reality, the entire thing would be a trap. The family would be elsewhere, and the gardens would be full of Pearson's best warriors, hidden and waiting. The night of the trap, Lucas made sure Mariani and the children were secured in the estate's reinforced chambers. Nellis, now 9 years old, understood what was happening and wanted to help. I can fight, she insisted. You taught me. You can fight, Lucas agreed, crouching to her level. but the best warrior knows when to fight and when to let others handle it. Right now, your job is to protect your mother and siblings. Can you do that? Nellis nodded seriously, accepting the responsibility. Lucas saw so much of Mariani in her, that same steel core. He kissed her forehead, then Fabelli's, then gently touched Andon's soft head. I'll be back soon. In the gardens, Lucas took his position. He wore his armor, the leather now reinforced with Varillian materials that were stronger than steel but lighter than silk. His sword was sharp and his knives were ready. Around him, hidden in the shadows, Pearson's warriors waited. The assassins came just after midnight, moving like ghosts through the cultivated pass. There were more than 3 now. They had recruited others from among the refugees, promising them wealth from House Thren's hidden coffers. Lucas counted 8 in total, all armed with swords, knives, and bows. Seaton led them toward where the celebration was supposed to be held. They moved with military precision, communicating with hand signals. These were professionals and they were here to kill. Lucas let them get into position, let them spread out among the gardens. Then he stepped out of the shadows, alone, his sword in hand. You're not very good refugees, he said calmly. The assassins froze, realizing they had been discovered. Seaton's face twisted with anger. You, the human. They said you were dangerous. They were right, Lucas replied. Then he whistled, and Pearson's warriors emerged from hiding, surrounding the assassins completely. But Seaton smiled and Lucas felt his blood run cold. You think you've won? You think this is the whole plan? He pulled something from his belt, a small device that Lucas didn't recognize. While you've been watching us, our real team hit the chambers where your family is hiding. You chose the wrong place to be, human. Lucas's world tilted. It had been a diversion. The real attack was happening right now, in the one place he wasn't. He turned and ran, his heart pounding, terror giving him speed. Behind him, he heard the sounds of combat as Pearson's warriors engaged the assassins, but he couldn't think about that. All he could think about was Mariani, Nellius, Fabelli, and little Andon, facing killers alone. He reached the private chambers to find the guards dead or dying. The door had been breached and he could hear sounds of fighting inside. Lucas burst through and saw a nightmare. 6 more assassins were in the room, and Mariani was fighting them with a spear, her movements desperate but skilled. Nellis stood in front of Fabelli and Andon's crib, a small knife in her hand, her face set with determination. Lucas didn't slow down. He hit the first assassin like a battering ram, his sword taking the man through the chest. He pulled the blade free and spun, blocking a strike meant for Mariani's back. The assassin looked shocked to see him, then died as Lucas's knife found his throat. 4 left. They tried to regroup, but Lucas was everywhere, his rage and fear making him unstoppable. He fought like the monster they had called him, like the man who had killed 100 predators in a single night. His sword sang and his knives flashed, and one by one, the assassins fell. The last one tried to run, but Mariani's spear caught him in the back. He fell gasping and died on the floor of the chamber. Lucas stood there, breathing hard, covered in blood. Then he looked at his family. Mariani was wounded, a cut across her shoulder, but alive. Nellius stood exactly where she had been, still protecting her siblings. Fabelli was crying, but Andon was miraculously asleep, unaware of the violence that had erupted around him. Lucas dropped his weapons and went to them, gathering them all in his arms. Mariani was shaking, the adrenaline wearing off, and even Nellis, brave Nellius, was crying now. But they were alive. All of them were alive. I've got you, Lucas whispered, holding them tight. I've got you. You're safe. Pearson arrived moments later with reinforcements. All the assassins were dead or captured. The plot had been exposed. Robiny, even in exile, had spent his remaining resources on one final attempt to destroy House Velestren. He had hired mercenaries, planted them among the refugees, and orchestrated a 2-pronged attack designed to catch Lucas out of position. It had almost worked. Almost. The council was furious when they learned of the attack. Robiny's exile was made permanent and absolute, his assets completely seized, and any remaining supporters of House Thren were investigated and removed from positions of power. The refugees who had been innocent were given genuine sanctuary and assistance. Those who had been part of the plot were imprisoned. But the cost had been high. 3 guards had died protecting the family chambers, and Mariani's injury would leave a scar. For weeks afterward, Nellis had nightmares, reliving the moment when she stood with her small knife, ready to defend her sister and brother. Lucas held her through those nights, reminded her that being scared was okay, that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Slowly, the family healed. The estate's security was overhauled completely, with new protocols that made such an infiltration impossible. Lucas trained additional guards personally, making sure everyone understood that protecting this family was not just a duty, but a sacred trust. Months passed, and peace gradually returned. Andin grew from a baby into a toddler, his hybrid nature showing in remarkable ways. He was stronger than Varillian children his age, but more agile than human children, the best of both the species. His eyes continued to shift colors based on his mood, and the physicians found his biology fascinating and unprecedented. Nellis and Fabelli grew into young women, their training making them formidable in their own right. They would never be helpless victims again. Lucas made sure of that, but more importantly, they retained their kindness and compassion, understanding that strength was meant to protect, not to dominate. One evening, 2 years after the assassination attempt, Lucas found himself back on the balcony where this story had really begun. Mariani joined him, and they stood together watching the sunset over the gardens. The scar on her shoulder was visible where her dress didn't cover it, a permanent reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Mariani asked softly. "Staying here, binding yourself to us? Your life would have been simpler on Earth." Lucas turned to face her, this woman who had become his everything. "Simpler? Yes, but simple has never interested me. I was a soldier on Earth, Mariani. I followed orders, completed missions, and moved on to the next deployment. I was good at what I did, but I was empty." He gestured to the estate, to the home they had built together. "Here, I have purpose. I have family. I have love. Every scar on my body tells a story now, not just of battles fought, but of people protected, of a life defended, of love proven through action." Mariani kissed him, and for a long moment, they simply stood together. Then they heard shouting from inside, the kind of excited noise that meant the children were playing. They smiled at each other and went to investigate. They found Nellius and Fabelli teaching Andin how to use a practice sword. The boy was too young for real training, but he was enthusiastic, swinging the wooden blade with more force than coordination. He saw Lucas and Mariani and ran to them, babbling in a mixture of English and Varillian, trying to show them what his sisters had taught him. Lucas scooped him up, feeling the weight of his son in his arms, and felt that familiar surge of protective love. This child, this impossible hybrid, represented hope for the future. He was proof that different species, different cultures, different worlds could come together and create something new and beautiful. That night, after the children were asleep and the estate was quiet, Lucas stood once more on the balcony, but this time, Mariani was with him, and together they looked out over their domain. 100 monsters, Mariani said softly, echoing the legend that had grown around that night in the jungle. One man, one night, 100 monsters. The stories have spread across the consortium. Other houses speak of you with respect and fear. Some call you the human blade, others the cave warrior. You've become a legend, Lucas. "I just did what needed to be done," Lucas replied. But he knew she was right. The story had taken on a life of its own, growing with each retelling. Some versions had him killing 200 monsters, others had him doing it with his bare hands. The truth was impressive enough, but people always wanted their heroes to be larger than life. "The twins told me something," Mariani continued. "They said that on that night when the monsters were attacking, you sang to them. Old Earth songs about hope and home. They said your voice was what kept them from being afraid." Lucas remembered. He had sung anything he could think of, every childhood lullaby and folk song he knew, filling the darkness with sound to drown out the snarls and screams of the predators. "I needed to keep them calm, needed them to know I was still there." "You gave them more than safety," Mariani said. "You gave them the belief that even in the darkest moment, even when surrounded by death, someone would stand between them and the darkness. You taught them what it means to be loved unconditionally." She took his scarred hand in hers, tracing the marks with her fingers. "Every scar tells a story. This one from the first predator you killed. This one from the raider's claw. This one from the assassin who tried to reach Andon. Each one bought us time, bought us safety, bought us life. Lucas pulled her close. And I'd earn 1,000 more if that's what it took to keep you all safe. They stood there under the three moons, two people from different worlds who had found each other through tragedy and violence, who had chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of loss. Behind them, through the windows, they could hear the soft sounds of their children sleeping, safe and loved and whole. The scars were worth it, every single one. Lucas touched the scars on his arms, permanent marks from that night in the cave. Each one represented a monster killed, a life taken to protect two innocent girls. At the time, fueled by adrenaline and determination, he hadn't thought about the cost. He had simply done what needed to be done. And since then, he had earned new scars, each one a story of protection and sacrifice. But now, standing here with a family he loved, in a home he would defend with his life, Lucas understood that every scar, every wound, every moment of pain and fear had led him to this, had led him to them. The reward wasn't political power or wealth or status, though he had gained all of that. The reward wasn't even the respect of the Varillian people or his place in history as the man who killed 100 monsters. The reward wasn't the legend that parents now told their children about the human warrior who stood against impossible odds. The reward was this: love, family, belonging. The reward was a purpose beyond himself. The reward was Mariani's smile, the twins' laughter, his son's tiny hand gripping his finger. The reward was knowing that every morning when he woke to faces he loved, in a home he had built with his own blood and sweat and determination. "Lucas!" Mariani called from inside, her voice filled with joy. "Come here. Andon is trying to say your name." Lucas smiled and turned away from the view, walking back into the warmth and light of his home. Behind him, the moons continued their eternal dance across the Varillian sky, watching over a family that should never have existed, born from tragedy and forged in blood, but held together by something stronger than steel. Love and the unbreakable will of a man who had proven that sometimes one person could make all the difference. He had killed 100 monsters to save 2 children. He had faced assassins, raiders, and political intrigue. He had earned scars that would mark him for the rest of his life. He had left behind his world, his species, everything familiar, to build a new life on an alien world among alien people. And standing in the doorway, watching his family wait for him, Lucas knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again. Every fight, every wound, every moment of terror and pain. Because they were worth it. His family was worth everything. 1 man against 100, and he had won. Not just that night in the cave, but every day since, in every choice he made to stand and protect rather than run, to build rather than destroy, to love rather than close his heart. This was his reward. This was his home. This was his life, earned scar by scar, battle by battle, choice by choice. And looking at Mariani's radiant face, at Nellius and Fabelli's proud smiles, at little Andon reaching for him with chubby hands, Lucas knew he was the richest man in the universe.